If you've ever considered building your own aircraft, then you definitely have thought about the engine options you have to fly behind. There are already several alternative options out there aside from legacy engines. But what about boat motors? Engines designed to run for long periods of time in harsh conditions at high RPMs. Let's have that discussion today with a career outboard motor mechanic and aviation enthusiast. All right, so let me bring John here, Jim Wright Davis. Any relation to the Wrights with the middle name there, Jim?
No, we're not far away. Well, I'm only like a 2-hour drive.
Okay. But anyway, I've had this thought for a long time. You know, all of us have a big interest in engines and aviation because that's what powers our aircraft, right? And there's not a whole lot of options out there. So I had thought about what other engine is out there that has a lot of time, thousands of hours, and is run good and high RPMs. And a boat motor, of course, comes to mind. And then everybody's starting to play with the Yamaha engines, and I'm a big fan of Yamaha too. So I started to look on eBay one day what a full-blown outboard motor costs, even a four-stroke. And this was a couple years ago. I think you can buy the whole thing, including the cowling and controls, for like $13,000. I'm like, wow, buy that, sell off the cowling and the foot, and come up with some way of doing it. But so Jim here, full time, works on outboard engines and is also passionate about aviation. So I figured, hey, let's talk to Jim about this idea. So Jim, welcome to the show. And thank you for participating in the 31-day build challenge this year and sharing. You are, in fact, using, I don't know that it's a boat motor, but it is a two-stroke unique.
It is.
And we'll talk about that for a second right now, and then we'll jump into the boat motor. What are you planning to use in your build?
Okay. In the late 80s and early 90s, there was an Italian company called Aero Motors, and they imported them in the United States, and there was a gyrocopter. I'm not sure exactly what the name of the company was, but they imported them from Italy. And they showed up at Oshkosh. I saw them, I think, in like 1993 when I was there, and they were very modular. They had the same cylinders on the single, the twin, and they had a 4-cylinder, and I think they even made a 6-cylinder for gyrocopters. And man, I had forgot about the motors, and I was just looking on Facebook Marketplace one day, and I ran across one of them and started doing my homework, went back into magazines and saw them, and there was a Facebook page for them. So I actually got in touch with the guy that actually bought the rights to it. And so I went on a hunt. I bought the one that was on Facebook Marketplace. And since then, I've been able to find about 4 more. But the ones I'm going to fly is a 2-cylinder opposed. It's a boxer engine. And it uses one carb. It uses a Beam 55, not the 54 like it's on the Rotax 503, but it's a Beam 55.
So what does that two-cylinder, two-stroke produce in power?
65 horsepower, and it weighs 85 pounds. It's got a Sprag clutch in the gearbox. So it does like a soft start, so it won't kick back so bad when it's idling. But it's a great looking motor. It's got a nickel seal bore, and I'm going to put an Ivo prop on it. And the only bad thing about when you use a one-off motor like this that's been gone for a while is getting parts for it. I mean, if I had a bad CDI box, it's a showstopper. And so I'm kind of collecting some of those. In fact, I'm even going to, eventually, I'm going to convert it to a Rotax 503 ignition because and mine's got dual ignition. They made that engine in the beginning with single ignition, and then they went to dual. And so, but I'm going to convert it to a 503 Rotax ignition eventually, so I can get all the parts I need.
That's awesome. That's really cool to come across that.
It'll fly my little plane. The only bad thing about it, the 2-stroke is the fuel consumption. I've got about a good 1,000 hours behind 503 Rotax.
Yeah.
Back in the early 80s, I became heavily involved in the ultralight world, and that's when we were flying West Bends and Zenoas and Cuyunas. And then Rotax come on the scene, and the first Rotax I ever flew was a 503 on a Terra Tierra two place, and I flew that plane 500 hours, and it never missed a beat.
Yeah.
And also went out to Bonita, Oklahoma, about 2013, and flew back a Challenger, two place Challenger with a 503 on it. It was 1,000 mile cross country, and I brought it home in 2 days, and it never missed a beat. They're good engines, two strokes. People write them off, but they're good engines. They just a lot of people just don't understand them.
Sure.
They're not really forgiven when you don't maintain them and that kind of stuff. But they're still good, viable engines.
So let's jump back into the outboard engine option here. Two stroke, of course, they've been around for a lot longer. The four stroke didn't come on the scene until it's probably been a decade or more now, but
Yep.
there's definitely a lot more runtime on two strokes. And being that you've worked on these engines for a long time, I assume this stuff coming through your shop. What would be a viable option in the two stroke world if anybody were to ever to convert? In the old experience I have, my dad had a Wellcraft with a I forget now, 150 horse Mercury on it, and it was a six cylinder. I think it
Yep.
was a six cylinder.
It was a V6.
It,
That was a good motor. It had a cast iron bore. It was a little bit heavy.
heavy. Okay. So it'd have
Believe
to
it or
be
not, they have. I'll have to find a link, send it to you. But they have flown. They flew to 2.5, which was a little bit bigger engine. Um, but there has been some in the man, it's amazing. If you go back through the EAA and you do some research, you'd be surprised what the guys back in the old days have done.
I mean,
I mean,
I've seen people fly rotary engines from Mazda, and that was a big kick back in I think the 90s, doing that. But I have yet to see personally an outboard, whether it's two stroke or four stroke. But two stroke would
um,
be easier because you're getting your oil into your gas, so you don't have to worry about when you turn it sideways so much. Whereas a four stroke, it'd have to be a dry sump, and then all kinds of things change.
well, let me just say this. My youngest trying to FaceTime. Let me cut this off.
Dynon Avionics at Dynon.com, offering everything from state-of-the-art glass cockpit options to advanced control modules that power and control your entire aircraft. Gratia Aero Group at GratiaAero.com, proudly representing these best-in-class brands for experimental general aviation. Sherwings, BD Aviation, and MW Fly. Visit us online at ExperimentalAircraftChannel.com for all things DIY aviation. And consider supporting us on our Patreon page to help us bring you more original aviation content.
But in 1981, I was walking around Oshkosh and I saw this little aluminum low wing airplane, not much bigger than a Hummingbird, and it had a Mercury Outboard sticker on it. And I didn't think much about it. And then when I got home, about 3 or 4 months later, it showed up in the Sport Aviation magazine. And what
Okay.
it was a 20 horse outboard, Mercury Outboard. And the guy that did it was Lyle Ferguson. And he led the team that designed the motor for Mercury. And he put a special prop on it, because when you turn in the motor direct, you had to cut the tips down on it to get, to keep the tips subsonic. And
Sure.
but it flew. I mean, it actually flew, and they used them in helicopters. Rotaway used a two-stroke B4 Johnson in his helicopters, and I think he even used some of the Mercury inlines in his some of his early conversions. But yeah, man, they some decent looking outboards out there, two-stroke wise, that you could convert. But now we got some state of the art four-stroke engines that's designed to turn the same RPM as those two strokes, and they can stay together.
Yeah. So skipping from the two stroke onto the four stroke, that's the most modern now, and that's what people are going to. What has come across your table
Well,
or your shop that you're like, man, or maybe
naturally,
there's a couple of them.
My little Honda three-cylinder, and it has flown. It has flown and successfully flown. Um, I was working on a Yamaha 50 horsepower today, believe it or not, and it is a four-cylinder inline, and it's got some of those motors had the oil pump built under the bottom around the crankshaft, and the crankshaft turned it. And that,
Where it connects to the foot.
yep, And
Yeah.
so that's not a real viable deal. You could, but you'd have to do some pretty good machining to machine some stuff to make it work. But the 50 horse Honda is a four-cylinder inline, and the camshaft turns the oil pump. So you would have to turn it up horizontal, and you'd have to, block it off, and then you would have to, do the conversion to get it to a dry sump. And usually, what they did, and what I was doing on my Honda, is you use the crankcase pressure to blow the oil back to the dry sump.
It's kind of like
Most,
what Rotax does, I think, correct?
exactly.
Yeah.
And a
Yeah.
lot of engines, they used a sump pump, another sump oil
And
pump,
scavenge.
scavenge pump. Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. But yeah, I was going to just blow mine back to the thing, and it's going to happen. But I can't let myself get sidetracked. I got to finish my plane first, fly it with the two stroke, and then we're
So,
going.
so yeah, us share with everybody. So you had this idea as well, and you like this Honda engine, and you actually went to as far as starting to create at least a conceptual
I did.
design. So what did you use, and how far did you get with it?
I used a Honda motor, and I bought a two-barrel Weber carburetor, and I made aluminum plate to go on the end of it, and I used it was all aluminum. I made my own belt drive. I bought the pulleys. I used a Gates poly belt, which is the real good Kevlar belt, and used straight pipe muffler out the side. And I was going to use just like a small automotive radiator. But on the water pump, I decided to try to use an electric Toyota Prius water pump. Those water pumps are unbelievable. They'll go thousands of hours. Of course, you got to have a battery to run it. That's the only bad thing. And the other guys that's done it, they used, I think, like an outboard motor water pump propeller and machined their own housings. But the guy in Europe that converted his, he actually cast. He had some access to some metal casters and stuff, and they designed and built some castings to make it work. And he used three single barrel carburetors off of a motorcycle, CV carbs. And he sent me pictures of it, but this was after the fact that I already had mine pretty much built.
Okay.
And I took it out to Mojave, and they had the design, build, and test thing. And I won an award with it. I won, let's see, what was the name of my award? I got it over there. It was best effort. And it was just a concept, but it was best effort. But it looked really good, and it's going to run. And I'm going to fly it one day, but I got to get my plane finished first. I just got to focus on my plane.
Yeah, too many irons in the fire. We can't build all the things all at once, right?
Yeah. But it's, man, there's still, if somebody wants to get into home built aviation, there's still some really good ways to do it cheaply. If you look around, the 503, Rotax finally took the 503 and the 582 out of service. So, in fact, I don't even think you can get crankshafts for them no more now. I'm expecting China to start sending some cranks over here, but there's still some good deals out there to be had. It's almost, for a while there, I was kind of getting a little discouraged because it just seemed like in EAA it was getting away from the little guy. You're seeing all these $100,000 Cubs and these Lance Airs, Glass Airs, and that kind of stuff. And it was just,
$100,000 Cub. That's an affordable Cub. What are you talking about?
yeah.
We got $400,000 Cubs.
But I had a Volkswagen, and I have built and flown several Volkswagen engines. I've been fortunate. I really have. I met a World War II guy when me and Ronnie got married 40 years ago. And he just kind of took me under his wing, and he built the first Lancer or the second Lancer 4 to fly. He built two Sonexes, and I built both the motors. One of them was the original Aero V, and then I built a Corvair for it. And I flew both of them. Flew them both, flew the time off on them, and actually flew it down here to North Carolina and kept it for a year after he passed away to get it ready to sell for the estate. Nothing wrong with the Volkswagen engine. I mean, there's a lot of good little airplanes like the Taylor monoplane, the Volksplane. If you want to fly, there's still ways to do it reasonable.
Hmm. So both ends of the spectrum here, the two-stroke and the four-stroke, being that you're an outboard mechanic, like what if somebody were to try to go down that path? let's talk about two-stroke for a second. What would be some of the things that would be working against you to make that work? Obviously, we're talking about a higher RPM, so you'd have to have a gearbox reduction unit.
Yep, yep. And
That's a given on
that
any
would be the
engine.
main thing. You would have to keep the weight down. You'd have to keep the weight down, depending on what horsepower you went with. Cooling would definitely be a big issue. Cooling. It's possible. You got your naysayers out there, but it is definitely possible to do it. You just have to be creative and you do it as light as possible, but
So,
keep it.
so the weight thing. So these aren't necessarily very lightweight. Are they more of a cast iron or iron sleeve? They're not
No,
all aluminum blocks, or
most Yamaha two strokes are aluminum blocks with a steel sleeve cast in.
okay.
Well, actually, Yamaha's got a removable sleeve. You can actually cut it out if you have to, because I used to put sleeves in them all the time. But some of the Mercury's have what they call a nickel silver or chrome bore too. Some of the V6s, um, and those things put out a lot of power. It's going to all boil down to your power speed reduction unit and cooling.
Okay.
But
So that just inherent weight of the engine, whether it has more meat to it, and there's some things you could probably shave off.
yep,
Well, I don't know. Boat motors are pretty barren to
right.
begin with.
Once you pull that power head off, it's light. You just got to turn it. It'd be best to try to do an EFI motor because the only thing that you would have to worry about turning up would be the VST because it's got a float in it like a carburetor, but it would run in any position. But it does have what they call a vapor separator where the little fuel EFI fuel pump is. It's got a float in it just like a carburetor, so it would have to be vertical, which would be real easy to do. You
Okay.
could do carburetors, but you'd have to cast you a manifold to bring them out, where they'd run horizontal.
Okay. So the other thing you're saying
Very
is
doable.
cooling. Boat motors are designed to be in the water. There is no radiator, and you're
Yep.
flushing cold water through it all the time. So, is it harder? It would be harder to have a small radiator and still keep it cool. Is that what you're saying?
Yep. You would have to put probably quite a bit of volume on it. What I was going to do is um, there was a guy in New Bern that had a BD5 with a 532 Rotax in it. And what he did is he took a a Volkswagen Rabbit radiator and he mounted it horizontal under the airplane and put some ductwork around it. So when he was flying, the airflow went through the top of the radiator and down through it. And that's what he cooled it with. And that radiator was, it was probably 2 foot by, it probably was about, it was a VW Rabbit radiator, ever how big those things is. And he had no
Okay.
issue cooling
But
those things.
but but you're saying that just the inherent design of a marine engine, because they've got so much cooling capacity on tap with water,
Yep,
ocean, pond, whatever, that they don't have to worry so much about keeping it light and scavenging a little bit of water because they've got it full blast all the time.
that's right. They got thermostats in them, and some of them's got like a little poppet valve and stuff. But it can work. But you just got to put enough volume radiator on it to make it work. But it
Now,
is very possible.
now speaking just two strokes, and I'm talking about anything from 50 to 200 horsepower. What kind of RPM did they normally operate at, or can you operate
But most two cycle engines, boat motor wise, operate between 4,800 and 5,500 RPMs.
all day long?
Yep. And now your bass boat guys, they will turn them up to 6,000. The rev limiter on the majority of boat motors is about 6,200, even four strokes. But yep, 48 to 5,500. Naturally, you would want to run it a little less than that. You wouldn't want to run it full bore all the time. But it 4,800 to 55 RPMs is usually the range. But on a boat, I always tell people if you're going to do water skiing and that kind of stuff, you need to get it on up to 55 to 5,800. That way, if you're pulling somebody up, it'll snatch them on up out of the water.
Yeah. So on a two stroke, let's say with 50 all the way up to like 200, what would be at a good operational RPM? What kind of fuel consumption would you see like on a 50 horse versus like a 200 horse at
Man,
those RPMs?
some of the Yamahas are pretty fuel efficient, especially if it's an EFI. Man, I don't know. I would say somewhere in the 5 gallons an hour range. Now, if 450.
Okay. For a 50 horse.
Mm-hmm.
So then on a 200 horse, you're talking about like
Yeah, some of those things on a boat, they burn
gulping it.
25 gallons an hour. Some of the big,
Okay. So
yeah,
even that right there,
Yeah,
Of course, you're not going to be running wide open the whole time. You're going to have just like
you're
any
not.
other engine, but still, you might see 12 to 15 on like 150 to 200 horsepower.
Yep, yep. I would
That's a
say
lot. That's a
it
lot.
is. Even the 503. I hear guys say, "Man, I get 3 gallons an hour with my 503." I've never been able to do that. Most, most of the time, the 503 is going to turn 5 gallons an hour, close to it.
So not to kick an idea down into the dirt already, but right away it sounds like on the higher horsepower options, as far as two-stroke anyway, the gallons per hour probably is just
It's
prohibitive.
yeah,
Or fuel consumption prohibitive.
yeah.
Okay.
I would say 75 horsepower, between 50 and 75 horsepower would be the ones to do.
Now, if you were to switch over to a four-stroke with like a Yamaha or a Honda,
Yep.
would you still see that same kind of fuel consumption because the RPMs are still there? We're talking about fuel flow now, or
I think the four strokes are they're a lot more fuel efficient. You could probably get a 100 horse or 115 Yamaha, really well designed engines. I don't know what the fuel burn on them would be, but it wouldn't be bad. I don't think it would be that bad. I think probably a 115 Yamaha would probably be about 5 gallons an hour.
okay.
Those things are very efficient.
Okay,
Very.
so then we're talking about a little bit more realistic and viable.
Yep. Yep.
And I say again, go back to that on a four stroke, and I've seen, just I researched this very little, but again, the way that is designed is there is an oil tank, and that is
It's no
below the
power heat.
engine. It
That's
kind of
right.
mates in between the foot and the engine. So
That's
if you
right.
were to turn that sideways, again, it'd have to be a dry sump, and you'd maybe even have to add oil squirters, or how would you?
I know in my 50, I wouldn't have to have oil squirters, but I had to drill some holes because it's got the 50 horsepower's got a internal gear be so they can set the outboard a little closer inside. So I had to drill some holes in a plate under there so oil would drip on that gear when I turn it horizontal and keep that gear lubricated. But no, um, I don't think you would have to because there's so much oil being slung in that thing from the crankshaft. I don't think you'd have an issue.
So you just have to
As
change
long
the
as that
pickup,
oil could
just change
pick
the
up.
pickup to basically, yeah, a dry sump,
Yep.
and then you also have to have well, that has a mechanical pump already, so you wouldn't
It,
have to have electric pump, or even you might have to have a scavenge pump.
it might for that a motor that big. I don't know if you could use the crankcase pressure or not to send it back to the tank.
So on the smaller motors, and even in your design, you were saying you utilized a belt drive. If you were to go into something bigger, I would think you'd want to go into something more of a gear drive.
Yep.
And what, just
It would be
researching this a little bit, what kind of things have you researched that would work with a boat motor as far as gear drive?
man. I haven't really done a whole lot of research. Some of those new drives, like Viking is using, that's a nice looking drive. The only drives out there would be like the Rotax drive. I mean, the gearboxes you could find your Rotax gearbox.
Yeah.
Back in the day, there was a guy named he drew up those old P-51 Mustang plans, and back in the day, what was his name? But anyway, he had a Hybo chain drive, and that seemed to work pretty good, but it's heavy. That drive like Viking uses and the Yamaha guys use, that's a pretty decent looking drive. I think that Rotax, let's see, it's the E gearbox, the one that's got a starter built into it.
Yeah.
You probably couldn't use the starter because Rotax, the boat motor probably turns the wrong way. But that gearbox or C gearbox would probably be fine.
Yeah, I've
Yeah,
seen that across a couple other different platforms, engine platforms, if you will. They just put a Rotax, box on it, and that seems to work. I don't know what it's rated to.
yeah.
One
I,
thing,
I like.
probably beyond 100 horsepower, then it probably starts to, put some different,
Yeah, man, I like
or
that little.
130 horsepower maybe.
Yeah, I like that little two-cylinder Yamaha they got too, and I think some guys I know they're flying in, with Rotax
The
boxes on.
phaser, I think it
Yep,
is.
yep,
Yeah.
yep. That's an awesome motor. That's all. Those Yamahas, man, they really they doing their work. I mean, they're being so far reliable, and that Steve Henry, he sounds like his is about to come apart every time he tries to take off. Man, he's turning that thing up big time.
Yeah, it's a like Formula One. Yeah,
Yeah,
so anybody joining this conversation here, there has been a couple. say aftermarket, if you will, installations of snowmobile engines from Yamaha, Kawasaki. I think a guy did out west on a STOL, and but that's about it. There hasn't been any Wave Runner engines. I understand like the way that they do their cooling system on that doesn't work as easy as it does for the snowmobiles, or it's heavier. Bike motors don't typically work, although I have seen, I think, an
I had
R1 engine that had the gearbox in it and everything still. I think he just
it
left it
had
in
on
first
like one of
gear.
those on World War I airplanes, I believe.
Okay.
When you saw
I think I don't remember now exactly, but I
Yamaha,
remember there
it
was
was
somebody put an R1 engine in
Yamaha.
an airplane, and I was like, yeah, he should just be going through the gears, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. They
But anyway,
flew,
well,
the
guys,
Harley Davidson too.
yeah,
It was called Hog Air. It was at
Hog Air.
do a little research on that one. It was out. It was at Sun and Fun for a couple of years, and I don't know if they ever sold any conversions, but they actually flew it on a Zenith.
Okay.
Hog Air.
Well, so everybody that showed up here today to hear the conversation about using outboard motors for aircraft, I'm kind of gonna end the conversation here. Jim and I are gonna continue on a conversation. I'll probably put this over on um, the other channel here for doing podcasts along the long run, but we're gonna talk other things. So we're gonna kind of end this topic here and continue on. So if you want to follow the conversation, check it out over on the Experimental Aircraft channel podcast. So.